Okay, I want to introduce you to a soldier. He served in World War II. He had a rank, he had a serial number, he had his own paybook, exactly like every other man in his unit. He carried live artillery shells to the front line during one of the bloodiest battles of the entire war. And he did all of this as a bear, a literal, actual, several hundred kilogram bear. His name was Wojtek, and he is, hands down, one of the most remarkable animals who has ever lived. So, settle in, because this story is equal parts hilarious, heartwarming, and honestly, by the end, a little bit emotional. Let's rewind to 1942. The Second World War is tearing the planet apart, and to understand Wojtek, you first have to understand the men who found him, because their story is incredible on its own. These were Polish soldiers, but not long before this, many of them had been prisoners. After the Soviet Union invaded Poland, hundreds of thousands of Poles were deported east into brutal labor camps in Siberia and Central Asia. Freezing, starving, worked half to death. Then the war shifted, alliances changed, and these prisoners were suddenly released and allowed to form an army. So they marched south, out of the Soviet Union, through Persia, to regroup and join the fight against the Nazis. These are men who had lost their homes, buried friends, and survived things most of us cannot imagine. That is the group we are talking about. And one day in 1942, in the mountains of Iran, a column of these soldiers comes across a local boy carrying a sack. Inside that sack is a tiny orphaned bear cub. His mother had been shot by hunters. The cub is skin and bones, barely alive. And the soldiers, these hardened, homesick survivors, take one look at him and completely melt, so they buy him. Reportedly, they trade the boy some tinned food, a bit of chocolate, and a penknife. And just like that, a group of Polish soldiers own a baby bear. Now, there is one small problem. Not a single one of them has the faintest idea how to raise a bear. At first, he is so young and so weak, he can barely swallow solid food. So they improvise, feeding him condensed milk out of an empty vodka bottle with a rag on the end. They name him Wojtek, a name that roughly translates to happy warrior, or the one who enjoys war. And Wojtek does something that changes everything. He imprints on these men completely. As far as this little bear is concerned, these soldiers are his mother, his father, and his entire family. He is one of them. And crucially, he does not grow up thinking he is a bear. He grows up thinking he is a soldier, just a slightly larger and furrier one. And I cannot overstate how much this bear behaved like one of the lads. As Wojtek grew, and he grew fast, he became the beating heart of the unit. He loved to wrestle the soldiers, and because he was, a bear, he almost always won, but he was gentle, pulling his punches, treating it like play. He learned to march alongside the men. He learned to salute when he was greeted. He developed a deep and slightly concerning love of beer, which became his favorite drink. Sipped straight from the bottle, and he would sulk if he did not get his share. He was fascinated by the camp showers and would sneak in to use up all the water, to the fury of everyone waiting behind him. And this is completely real. He loved cigarettes. Not to smoke, exactly. He would beg you for a lit cigarette, take it gently, and eat it. Swallow it whole. He also had a serious weakness for fruit, honey, and marmalade, and would happily raid the food stores if nobody was watching. But it was not all fun and games and stolen marmalade, because Wojtek also, and I promise this is true, once caught a spy. One night, at a camp in the Middle East, Wojtek wandered into the bathhouse, looking for a cool place to sit, and found a stranger already hiding inside. It turned out to be an enemy agent who had sneaked in to spy on the ammunition depot. Wojtek cornered him. The terrified man started screaming, the guards came running, and the intruder was arrested on the spot. For his heroic work in counter-espionage, Wojtek was rewarded with exactly what you would expect: a bottle of beer and permission to keep using the showers. But then, in early 1944, the unit received its orders. They were shipping out to Italy to join the main fighting. And here is where they hit a very serious problem. The transport ships were British, and British military regulations were absolutely clear. No pets, no mascots, no animals of any kind allowed on board. Full stop, no exceptions. And for these men, that was unthinkable. Wojtek was not a pet. He was their brother. He had been through everything with them. There was no version of this where they sailed off to war and left him standing on the docks. So they came up with a solution so absurd that it looped all the way back around to being genuinely brilliant. If mascots were not allowed on the ship, fine. Then Wojtek would not be a mascot. Wojtek would be a soldier. So they went ahead and officially enlisted him. This bear was formally drafted into the Polish army. He was given the rank of private. He was assigned a serial number, and he was written by name into the paybook and the roster of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. On paper, in ink, he was now a real enlisted member of the armed forces. And so, when the British checked the paperwork, there was no bear. There was only Private Wojtek reporting for duty, and onto the ship he went, off to war. Now this is the moment the story stops being just a funny anecdote, because in 1944, that unit found itself at the Battle of Monte Cassino. If you are not familiar with it, Monte Cassino was one of the most brutal, grinding, and costly battles of the entire war. A fortified monastery high on a mountain, blocking the Allied road to Rome, defended ferociously. The Allies threw themselves at it again and again for months, and thousands upon thousands of men died on those slopes. And it was the Polish Second Corps, Wojtek's people, who were finally given the job of taking the summit. So this is not a cushy posting. This is the sharp, bloody end of the war. And Wojtek's unit handled artillery supply, which meant one exhausting, dangerous job. Hauling heavy wooden crates of shells from the trucks to the guns, over and over, often under enemy fire. And Wojtek stood there, and he watched his family struggling with these crates. And then he did something nobody trained him to do. He walked up to a truck, stood up on his hind legs, held out his arms, and asked for a crate. And the men, half in disbelief, handed him one. And Wojtek carried it to the guns, and then he went back for another. And these crates were not light. We are talking boxes weighing as much as 100 pounds, packed with heavy artillery shells, the kind that men normally carried in pairs, straining. Wojtek carried them alone, upright, walking like the soldiers he had grown up with. And according to the men who were actually there, in all that noise and smoke and chaos, with shells landing around them, Wojtek never once dropped a crate, not a single shell. He just kept working, calm and focused, doing his part, refusing to let his family down while one of the worst battles of the war raged around him. Just sit with that image for a second. The absolute horror of Monte Cassino. Explosions, gunfire, terrified, exhausted men clinging on, and moving through the middle of it, a bear, carrying ammunition to the front, steady as anything. For those soldiers, Wojtek was not just an extra pair of hands. He was a reason to keep going. He was morale on 4 legs. He was living proof that even in the worst place on earth, at the worst moment of their lives, there was still something loyal, and something good, and something worth smiling about. And the men never forgot it. For everything he did, Wojtek was promoted from private to corporal. And the 22nd Company was so proud of their bear that they made him their official emblem. They designed a badge showing a bear standing upright, carrying an artillery shell in his arms, and they stitched it onto their uniforms and painted it onto their trucks and their equipment. A bear became the official symbol of the entire company. He had earned it. And then the war ended. And this, for me, is where the story quietly breaks your heart. When the fighting was over, the Polish forces were moved to Britain, and then, slowly, the units were disbanded. But these particular men could not simply go home, because home, the Poland they had left, was now under Soviet control, and for many of them going back would have meant prison or worse. So here they were, in a foreign country, with no home to return to, and a fully grown, 500-pound bear who genuinely believed he was a person. They loved him, but they could not keep him. And so, in 1947, with heavy hearts, they made the hardest decision, and they gave Wojtek to the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland. And Wojtek lived out the rest of his days there, behind a fence, a long way from the guns and the trucks and the family he had grown up in. But he was never, ever forgotten. His old comrades, now scattered and settling into civilian life, would travel to visit him. And the stories from those visits are the ones that get me. When the veterans called out to him in Polish, he would lift his head and perk up, recognizing the language of his family. Some of them would climb over the barrier and into the enclosure just to sit with him and wrestle like the old days, to the absolute horror of the zookeepers. And they would toss him cigarettes over the fence, and he would eat them one by one, just like he always had. He had gone from a brother in arms to a lonely animal in a cage, but the men who loved him made sure he always knew he was still one of them. Wojtek died in December 1963. By the end, he weighed around 500 pounds and stood over 6 feet tall. And today, he is remembered not as a novelty, but as a genuine war hero. There are statues of him in Edinburgh, in Krakow, in London, and beyond. A bear, cast in bronze, standing shoulder to shoulder with the soldiers he served alongside, so that people would remember he was real. So here is why this story has stayed with me. It would be so easy to tell it as just a wacky piece of trivia. A bear that drank beer and ate cigarettes and carried bombs. And yes, all of that is genuinely brilliant. But underneath the jokes is something quietly beautiful. A group of men who had lost their country, their homes, their families, and very nearly their own lives, stumbled across one small, orphaned creature who needed them, and they chose to give him a family. And in return, in the middle of the worst war in human history, he gave them something to protect, something to laugh about, and something to fight for. Because in the end, Wojtek was not really a bear pretending to be a soldier. He was a soldier, who just happened to be a bear. If you enjoyed this one, stick around, because there are so many more incredible animal stories where this came from. See you in the next one.